Okay, welcome everyone to another State of the Reactor. Today we are going to walk through some updates on Tokemak V2 or GP and give a better or maybe first true introduction to what we're calling autopilot, which we'll discuss shortly. We're also going to be releasing a public timeline that people can view whenever they want, and this will be like kind of an in-depth timeline that shows all of the many pieces that need to fall into place in order to get the first part of this product to market. It's a publicly adapted Asana board, which we're going to have Bruno introduce in just a little bit, but it'll give everyone a transparent sense of timeline that we're currently operating under, given all the tasks at hand. So that's kind of a summary, but we have a lot to get through. So with that, I will turn it over to Sharp, I think, is going to take the first part. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I'll just give a quick recap of the DAO product. We think that we can provide a complementary solution that addresses some of the limitations of the current liquidity solutions. So most protocols right now, they rely on gauge-based systems, where essentially protocols are using bribing mechanisms that can be used to rent incentives at either market rates or fixed rates, but you always end up with unknown depth of liquidity. In addition to that, specifically for LSD markets, we know that there are fluctuations in terms of their needs and demand for liquidity, due, for example, to on-chain liquidations or the exit queue. So we wanted to provide DAO product that is able to address these limitations with a real-time liquidity solution where the DAOs will pay the liquidity that they are actually using according to a rate. And there are great open questions now that we will answer on this call, like how can we source this TVL sustainably? And in addition to that, how do we get to this rate?
And so just to bridge a little bit of what Sharp was saying before Craig digs into the other side of the house here, I think in the past we've talked a bit about GP's DAO-facing product, effectively where DAOs or protocols, especially liquid staking derivative protocols, are able to effectively see a real-time liquidity rental rate within our platform that's actually deterministic. So there will be a concept of a liquidity order books, and this will be a real-time liquidity solution, as Sharp said, to kind of contrast with gauge voting, which often is on kind of bi-weekly type cycles. So here DAOs will be able to bid for liquidity and pay and know exclusively the amount of liquidity they're going to get at a known rate. So either they can put in a number of incentives and know exactly how much liquidity they get and for how long, or if they know that they need a certain amount of liquidity for a given Ethereum liquid staking derivative, which is of course even more relevant now post Shanghai, they'll be able to know exactly what rate they need to pay for that liquidity. I think one thing that I'll just note before we turn it over to Craig to kind of go through the other side of the house, the more user-facing side, which we haven't spent much time talking about. I should note that this DAO-facing product builds on what Craig is about to cover from sort of a problem statement and ultimately product side on the user side. So in order to get the DAO product up and running, we need reliable liquidity or TVL, and we want to source that in a sustainable manner that doesn't require emissions from the Tokemak side. So maybe I'll throw it over to you, Craig, and you can jump into the problem side, problem statement from the user side.
One quick final note. I know that LSD-Fi is starting to become something trendy, but I just wanted to re-emphasize that the logic of both of our products, which will compose V2, can be extended to other addressable markets. This just happens to be the first one that we want to explore.
Yeah, that's a great point. So what I'll do here is I'll introduce the other side of Tokemak, the one that faces users, and it does create a foundation which can be extended to many different types of assets, many different types of markets, as I think both DAOs and users are interested in participating in those types of markets. One of the things that's really exciting about Tokemak V2 is even though these mechanisms change, Tokemak is still focused on bringing these two pieces of creating markets together. DAOs that need liquidity and users that are looking to provide some sort of additional opportunity or productivity to the assets that they hold, and or for projects that they believe in. And so I'll take you through now one place that Tokemak is starting, and that, as Art mentioned, is on the LST side of the space, is in the LST side of the space. So what do we know, and why are we focused on LSTs? We know many LSTs are launching. They're all vying for liquidity right now, and that is making LST pools pretty great targets for users that may be interested in becoming LPs. These pools generally feature low volatility. At least half the trading pair has some kind of natural underlying yield, and sometimes both sides of the trading pair have some natural underlying yield. So that stacks on top of trading fees, and some of these pools have some pretty good volumes associated with them. And then where we're seeing a pretty solid amount of returns is in rewards offered by these LST protocols to support liquidity. So if you're an LP, this seems like a solid stacking of value. And that's especially true if it's in a pool for an LST that you're comfortable in holding. And what we know, at the very least, all of these returns should beat the staking yields for these protocols to encourage LPs to not just hold the staked asset, but then put them to work in the markets. So if you understand all that and you've said, okay, now I want to LP, where should I do that? Let me show you a graph of kind of where I think you'd get to. And Connor, I think this is a good time to bring up that graph.
I think it's working. So if you guys see my screen, you can click on the chart. It should bring it up as a larger, more legible chart.
Cool. And let me explain to you what is in here, and then we can dig into a little bit of the details. So the y-axis here shows percentages. So 10, 20, and 30. That's 10%, 20%, and 30%. And then you have time on the bottom. And then each of these different colored lines show the total returns for LPs in a set of 9 potential LP pools, all that are in ETH stable pools. And what I really love about this graph is it shows if you want to be an LP, what you're trying to do is always be in the pool that is the top line at any given point in time. And so what that would mean is that first we look back, you'd want to be in the orange line. I think that's the ETH pool in Curve. It says convex here because this is where a lot of the rewards are captured. But you can think of, when you look at these different lines, as aura means balancer, and then you're capturing rewards through the aura system, and convex means you're an LP in Curve. So back to the orange line, you'd start there. There were only 2 pools at that time, probably pretty easy to pick where you'd want to be. Those pools do cross, however, and you get this kind of turquoise line, and you would want to be in the ETH pool. And then a little bit later, back in the orange pool, and then things really get crazy with the launch of some more LSTs. You'd want to be in the blue and then the red, and I think that's Abstaked ETH and Rocket Pool and etc. If you're trying to do all this, I think the takeaway is maybe you could do this is a lot of work for an LP to optimize their position, and work in a couple of different ways. One, you need to know what these APRs are yourself. So that's a lot of research. Then after you've identified this kind of baseline data, identify a strategy for yourself that you think helps optimize these positions, and then execute that position. So a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of knowledge. And then at the end of the day, there's also a lot of cost for an individual user to try and implement any strategy to optimize these returns. And this is just in a set of nine potential pools. It's expanded since we kind of started to run this data to follow the market. We know of additional LSTs that are launching over the next couple of months, and actually new AMMs that provide some pretty significant opportunities that are even greater than the ones that you see on here. So I think if we kind of look at what this means for the user, this is probably unmanageable for most users to do, and that's really the problem that Tokemak is trying to solve. The core problem that Tokemak is going to solve for users is if you've got assets that you want to make productive, we're here to help you do that in an optimal way. And then, oh, by the way, what if we told you that now DAOs, who are part of this kind of strategy, or your superset of pools, would actually be bidding or competing for your liquidity to be added to their pool. So you're going to take this sort of following the top line and maybe even juice that and increase it higher than what you would see here without that part, the DAO piece of the system. And I think I'll probably stop there. That was a lot of talking. And Bruno, I believe, is going to probably take you through a few more of these details.
I just have some final comments here, Craig. So I've personally felt this experience, so I want to be directionally exposed to ETH. And when you think about yield opportunities, you think about lending your ETH, then you can stake your ETH. If you want a premium above that, you can LP your ETH. And then we'll have new opportunities, like, for example, restaking our LP tokens on EigenLayer, but that's for the future. So if you are trying to optimize this by yourself, like I did, you need to have kind of a rebalance day. And on that rebalance day, you need to just go over all the opportunities. You need to look at what's the actual backing, for example, of each LST. The transaction costs are really absurd. Like anyone that has deposited liquidity into Curve and staked on Convex knows that it's very hard to fully optimize this across a various set of pools. And what we know now with the proliferation of LSTs is that this will only become progressively harder because there will be more and more yield opportunities. So capturing this fluctuation and this huge variation in yield is going to be progressively harder. So yeah, I'm just happy that this is a utilitarian solution for my own personal problem.
Scratching an itch. So let's see. That's great. Super well said, Manuel. I think one other additional piece to drive this sort of challenge home for LPs. Again, back to this graph, the orange line where someone would have started if they wanted to be in an optimal LP position was great for a while. It turns out that very recently the yields on this particular pool, the Steth ETH pool and Curve, are actually lower than the base staking rate for just holding pure staked ETH from Lido. So if you're really not paying attention to this and optimizing yourself, it's hard to do this in any kind of optimal way. And this is what Tokemak's trying to solve for users, and kind of along the lines of being a decentralized market maker. Broadly speaking, where can and maybe should users be putting assets to work for the best returns? Most productively is probably how I should say that.
Okay, so I think you guys can hear me. So I'm going to go a little bit over the with Sharp. I'm going to talk a little bit through this, like basically first product that we're going to launch, which we named currently the Autopilot. So looking at the kind of the complexity that Craig just laid out on the LP side, we identified that this is a great opportunity to be able to offer a service here that then enables us to source like sustainable liquidity on the DAO facing product side. And like, running all of these simulations over time, which we'll talk a little bit in a later point. We came up with this product, which I'm pretty sure like currently does not exist in the market. And it's basically like an auto rebalancing product, right? For that which we call the autopilot for LPs. So LPs will be able to provide their ETH, and the allocator will then basically identify the best yield opportunities. And the complexity here is, going back to a little bit what Craig said, is it not only takes into account like the kind of the headline yield that is on any given like pair on a protocol, but it also takes into account like the underlying, like the native yield, the trading fees, any additional rewards that are paid out to a pool. Then it takes into account for the rebalancing between the pools, it takes into account the slippage, right? Because the slippage can be positive. You can take into account, which we're taking into account, the backing of the LSD. So we can get beneficial like slippage, so to speak, right? By knowing that the backing, and then the DPEG, we could go into that. It can also prevent us from like getting basically burned by slippage or like peg changes. It takes into like the exchange rates. So it does all this like automatically. So auto rebalancing very frequently. And then also like the auto compounding, which I think was always a big topic that people were speaking about, auto compounding. So this autopilot will offer auto compounding on that also as well. Sharp, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, and so this will work across several AMMs. I think that we've discussed in the past that we're integrating Balancer, we're integrating Curve, but also newer AMMs that offer concentrated liquidity, like, for instance, Maverick, where actually the base yield just from trading fees is very appealing. And in addition to this, I just need to highlight how important it was the work from our analytics team, because it's extremely complex to work just through all of these simulations, because what we take into account isn't just a naive follow the highest APR strategy. You need to actually take into account the backing that each LSD has, which fortunately we can check this on chain, unlike, for example, with centralized stablecoins. So this is one of the reasons why this is such an appealing market to start with. And then in addition to this, the autopilot product will really enable us to just source TVL in a sustainable manner, where we don't rely on our own emissions. We're just providing a superior offer to the current LP opportunities that users have. And the whole value proposition here is that this is a means to an end, and it's to source this TVL that we can then also offer to DAOs, which can rent it on demand, on real time, and according to a known rate. This known rate is then extrapolated from the external incentives that the autopilot or the auto rebalancer is currently supporting. And so this is a transparent way for such DAOs to access liquidity. We will also, on the next community call, have a presentation by one of the members of our analytics team, Parker, and he will just present the pool allocator logic and all the backtesting and groundwork that led to this.
Yeah, something that I might add here in regards to the presentation, this will not only be interesting from like a Tokemak perspective, but I think anyone that's interested in just LPing, I think this will be basically a masterclass into like all the ins and outs, because it's really like highly complex. There's like a lot of like counterintuitive effects to it, a lot of like interdependency in between the peg, for example, and the APR. So if there's anyone that you know that might be interested in this, this will be a great one for them to listen in on. Another thing that I wanted to add here is, as we look back onto V1, as many people have identified, there was always the issue that we needed for any given like operations for Tokemak, we needed like basically the buy-in from both sides, right? Like we needed the LPs, and we needed basically the buy-in into the system from the DAOs. With Tokemak GP, we have these two products that basically work in unison and create like kind of this ecosystem, but they are they're not depending on each other. Meaning, the success or the success you can say of this user-facing rebalancer, the autopilot, will not depend on the buy-in from the DAOs. So the system will work, it will run, it will offer all the value that is there, regardless of if there's ultimately buy-in from the DAO side, right? So there's not this dependence, on the DAOs.
With that being said, we've also already had plenty of discussions with other LSD protocols. There is a lot of excitement about this real-time solution where you're able to bid on liquidity according to a known rate. So this is a really powerful concept because finally you have a place in DeFi where you can just bid directly for liquidity. You are not voting, you are actually bidding, because voting introduces a lot of frictions. So you can bid for liquidity and there is a rate for that. And having Tokemak as a place where both of these products come together, and these are really symbiotic products, because it's necessary to have the autopilot first, and that's the reason why we are deploying first this product, in order to just scale the TVL that will feed the DAO components. But as Bruno said, the DAO-facing product, it will have varying fluctuation, right? The demand for liquidity changes according to market cycles. But Tokemak will still have the autopilot that keeps on generating the returns that are associated with it.
Yeah, and with that, I think I'm going to speak a little bit about the Asana board. And if you could put the link into the chat.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to drop it into the dev feed, and then I'm going to pin that there, and then every Wednesday when we do our weekly roundup, we'll probably relink it so people can have fast access to it, and then we'll do a note of any changes that might have happened over the week on the timeline.
So kind of dropped in the link so anyone can now look at it. So there was like this, I think everyone would agree that like more transparency is better. So what we did is we created a public-facing version of our Asana board. A few points to that. So if you look at it, there's above on the top, I'm sure like people will need to like familiarize themselves a little bit with it. But you can basically click on list view, board view. Timeline view is, in my opinion, the best one to get a sense of like the timeline. The calendar view will probably give you a stroke. So if you look at the timeline view, you will see you have on the left, you have like all the different kind of groups that are working groups, basically like people that are working on a rebalancing strategy on the back end of the autopilot. Then on the order book side, which is the DAO-facing product, the back end work there. The landing websites, all the UI elements, the interfaces. So you have like all these different pieces, and then you see the tasks or like the milestones that we're working on. We've reduced a little bit of the clutter in there, so I've simplified it a little bit because I think the full version, there's a lot of things in there that are like just not that interesting and kind of become more confusing than anything else. But I think this should give people more than enough information. I think might be actually a little bit too much in terms of like readability. So yeah, we're going to be updating this periodically, probably like once a week. If there's any changes, we'll tick the box if something is completed. Yeah, if there's any like larger material changes to it, we'll make like additional announcements. If there's anything like material. So there will likely be changes to it. So for example, if you look at audits, based on our experience, we've made like good middle of the road assumptions in terms of like the timing of like, for example, audits. So these might change a little bit, might shift around a little bit, but I think overall it should give you a pretty good idea of the timeline.
And a very tangible date that we're really confident in is that the code will go to audit late May. But as Bruno said, there's then a lot of uncertainty with regard to what comes back from the audit, what changes might need to be done. So keep in mind that part of the dashboard on Asana might change slightly, but still this is the place where the community can now look for direct updates into the roadmap that we developed.
Yep. And then also, if you, just to reiterate this, to drive this point home, if you look at the timeline, there's certain items, especially AMMs, right, that might give you a hint that we're like strongly looking at layer 2, as we've spoken about before when we talked about the DAO-facing product. So we're looking at Arbitrum, Optimism, ZK Sync, things of this nature. Yeah, and I think with that we
and yeah, so just a few other notes. Like, unlike V1, it's far easier to just populate V2 on all of these other layer 2 solutions, and these can be standalone deployments. So when you look, for example, at the supported AMMs, feel free to also consider that the forks of these AMMs will also be supported. So if we say balancer, you can also think about Beethoven, for example, on Optimism. If you see Velodrome, you can also think about Velodrome forks. These are just the AMMs that we currently have adapters for. And just for curiosity of those on the call, if you don't know Maverick, take a look at it. It's a really interesting AMM. Just look at the TVL and the volume that they are generating. It's a great team, so check them out also.
I think maybe one or two last things to hit on the roadmap would be useful for everybody. So let's see. Audits that Sharp mentioned, those are for the user-facing side of this, which is the one labeled autopilot. So those will be late May, early June, depending on how all of these tasks actually line up. If we follow that out on this baseline of anticipated but estimated audit timeline, where it'll take some period of time for the auditors to audit, depending on the level of fixes that are needed. That will take some other period of time, and then those need to be reviewed. All of those are out of our control, somewhat out of our control, but we put some good estimates in here, which we think are reasonable. And then after that, post to Immunify for a little bit, to let it bake there with a good bounty. And so what that means is that when you stack all of this up or line it all up, we're looking at a late July, early August launch of the user side of this. The DAO side is trailing by about a month. So that means handing off to auditors about a month after the autopilot goes to audit, and then would still follow the same kind of sequence of events there. And what that would mean is that the DAO side of this would go out late August, early September. Sometimes feels like a lot out, but actually there's over half that timeline is on security, and that's an area where we are uncomfortable compromising for all the reasons you can imagine.
And I think in there we have some notes on when we hope to get testnet launched and some of the more UI stuff. So hopefully there'll be things to use earlier than that, since as soon as we push this to audit, then it's just security from then on out. Does that make sure I didn't say that incorrectly, Craig?
All of that is great. Yes, should have hit that too. So there is a testnet in here, and we will be conducting a number of our tests internally, of course, and then we are anticipating opening that up to users and hopefully having some sort of structured feedback mechanisms for all of you to provide feedback in the UI, UX, and then overall value prop as we go to market, which will be fun for us to be able to give you that a little bit sooner than the actual launch. And I think a really good opportunity for us to also learn what's working in there, and if things that are in there that need some tweaking, give us an opportunity to adapt and hear some of your thoughts along the way.
Yeah, I can say, yeah, go ahead, Sharp.
Just a final reiteration. This is just the first market that we're going to support. And for all the previous reasons that we discussed, we believe that the ETH market is the most important one. But there are expansion opportunities not just to other layer 2s and AMMs, but also to other assets and markets.
All right, and then two kind of top-down things to close with. One, with all of Tokemak V2 or Tokemak GP, this is really about establishing a significant value prop and usable utility for two groups, one users that hold Ethereum and two DAOs. And so with GP, we'll be providing value for both those groups. And there's, of course, a lot of ways then that we can drive value back to the Tokemak community. The second piece with that is, since we're providing a lot of value sort of directly to those groups, this can all be run without emissions. So it's important to note that here, unlike sort of all of DeFi back in the day, including when Tokemak V1 launched, the product market fit is not using emissions to gain TVL. This is actually providing significant value for two big groups within the DeFi ecosystem and establishing sort of a network between those two groups.
Okay, and I'll take it over. And I think it's also one last thing to note before we close is that we do have an awareness marketing campaign that we're building out that will definitely launch sooner than the product to start building awareness. So that's probably going to happen next month. In May is when we start ramping up the marketing for this. So expect to see us be a little bit more visible, Twitter and social and other places. And we're really excited for this launch. So is there any last thoughts from anybody on the team?
Yeah, just again, congratulations to the analytics team. It's also easier to expose now to the community why we weren't perfectly clear with all of these points. It's because there was still a lot of ongoing work on their side. But now that we are fully confident in the value prop, the strategy, which is extremely complex, and we know more or less the timelines, at least to ship this code with, then the uncertainty that follows in terms of audits. We believe that it's time to just become fully transparent with the community and just showcase the product that we are all extremely excited about. And we think that the product market fit is undeniable for both sides.
Yeah, and I think that Parker's presentation, the next community call, will really drive that home with some hard data. So great. Thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate it. And we appreciate everyone in the community for sticking with us. And we're really pumped about V2. We're excited to get this thing on the road, get the show on the road, as they say.
They do say that.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a nice weekend, guys.
Thanks, everyone.